Let's be honest, parenting certainly isn't easy. It's even more difficult when you're told that anything you do will result in the death of your children. So, in this video, we're going to talk about myths and lies that are thrown at parents when they decide to deconstruct high control religion. Before I get into this, I want to thank you so much for subscribing. It really helps us out immensely to get the word out that there is freedom on the other side when you start deconstructing. Also, I have a TikTok community that is growing. If you want to be part of that, head on over to TikTok where we talk about other cool stuff. Nowadays, religion is more of a framework for how to live. There's no surprise to me that people are raising children without religion. People are turned off to religion because of the conduct of those who claim to follow it. So if you've had a bad experience in religion, certainly you don't want to raise your kids up in that same exact situation. Truth be told, in most high control religions, people worship their religion. Let's dive into the top about parenting as it pertains to high control religion. Myth number 1, you will not raise morally upstanding citizens without religion. Why do people think this? Well, because people think that morality is based on right or wrong, when really morality is based on healthy versus unhealthy. For me, when it came to unraveling indoctrination in my children at their particular ages, what we do is we focus things on the positive. When we frame things on hope and possibility and positivity, kids seem to be very resilient and accepting of new things going on in the household. For example, when you buy a new house and you relocate and you're moving and they need to switch schools, what do you tell them? You tell them it'll be an adventure. It's going to be a great time. These are great things that are going to happen, and mom and dad are making these choices. If we frame things in positivity and hope with a good outlook for the future, focusing on how the outcome is theirs to decide, these situations will take stress out of the equation. Your kids are going to die if you are not in the religion anymore. This is inspired by a letter that was written to me by a longtime friend who made it a point to tell me 3 times in one letter that my children are sure to die because I had a change of belief. Friendship. The fact of the matter is that simply is not true. That is indoctrination talking. There are many ways to raise children to be moral and respectful without religion. And if you're in the process of unraveling indoctrination and deconstructing, right now, you might be thinking that that is impossible. Right now, you might be thinking that you are responsible for your kids' lives. Right now, you may be wondering what is going to happen to them. And you may subscribe to the ideology and the mindset that if you don't stay tied to high control religion, that your kids are going to make bad choices. Well, here's what I have to say about that. Your kids' choices depend on your upbringing and how you teach them and the examples you set. If you are like me, where you were raised with religion and you're a little confused about how to raise kids without the book, let's dive into some tips. Let's talk about some common morals. Tell the truth, have courage, treat others as you want to be treated, be forgiving, have integrity, be generous, serve humankind. How do you teach these things without religion? Any parent would know that one of the most important ways in which children learn is by the examples that we set. If we want our children to be forgiving, then we need to be forgiving. For example, I have found myself as a mom saying, "Don't yell." And I'm yelling at them to not yell. And let's face it, parenting is not easy. So forgive yourself if you have not been the best example in parenting. We are not going to get wrapped up in the shame and guilt cycle. We're here to unravel those things. Also important is to find teachable moments. When I was unraveling indoctrination with my children, I didn't directly go to them and unload my faith crisis onto them. In fact, I waited for it to come up. My daughter is an extremely intelligent human being, and she would just ask me questions like, "Mom, why are we not going anymore?" Just out of sheer curiosity. And I would say, "Well, first of all, what do you think? What did you think of them?" And I would ask her questions and get her viewpoint. And point blank, I would answer her questions with full honesty that was age appropriate. I would say things to her, "You know what? We're just not going to go right now. We're still kind of figuring things out." And that was the honest truth. I did not get into the details of why I was not interested in raising her in that religion anymore, because I myself was still kind of unraveling that and figuring it out. If you go to my last video, you'll know how my son felt about the gloom and doom talks that happened on Sundays and how deeply affected he was by them. So my son, he noticed we weren't going. And here's the thing, parents, when you're unraveling this, it is very important that you have to understand that you too may be feeling guilt and shame while you're unraveling your kids. And it's very similar to if you were raised in a dysfunctional household, which I was. When you now have children, it's very similar to reparenting yourself while you're parenting your children. It's not easy, but it is possible. So for my son, I just simply said, you know what? We're not going anymore. We're going to go in a different direction. And we have some really great things coming up ahead of you. And the thing is, kids, if they don't have the answers, they will fill in the blanks with their own imagination. I know my son personally, sometimes he does default to, is he the reason that we aren't going anymore? Those times that he decided to be a normal toddler and act out. And I didn't want him to conclude that he was the reason we weren't going anymore. And sometimes kids are more aware of situations than we give them credit for. I know this to be a fact with my own kids. So in the event that we're not going anymore, making sure that they know they are not the reason is extremely important. Because remember, we are in this organization that promotes the guilt and shame cycle. And that is implanted in them from a very young age. And we were that family where we watched Caleb and Sophia religiously, no pun intended, every single night after dinner, before bed. We were really indoctrinating our children. So to unravel all that takes the next step, humility. As a parent, sometimes we position ourselves as the foremost authority on everything. And sure, certainly we have a lot more experience than our kids do in this world. But if I want my kids to be humble and honest with their kids in the future, or anyone else for that matter, I decided I'm going to be humble and honest as well. And I'm going to say, ooh, you know what? Mommy's a little older than you and she may be taller than you, but mommy has only been a mommy for as long as you've been a kid. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to figure this out together. So we're just going to kind of pivot and we're going to figure it out as we go along. That way it opens up dialogue for kids to see that their parents are human beings too, also figuring life out just like they are. One of the other things that I have done is engage them in inquiry. It is really important that our children know it's okay to question us. And if you're not doing this already, sometimes being raised in high control religion, the topic of sexuality is something that is very difficult for many parents to talk about. I didn't have this conversation with my parents at all. All I knew was that it was bad and it was wrong and it's terrible until you get married. And yeah, you can do it and it's free. And what? No. So from a young age, self-respect. For me, I want my daughter and my son to respect their bodies and to understand that their bodies are made beautifully and perfect just the way that they are. It is extremely important that they make decisions based on their values that we are responsible for instilling into them, while guiding them in making their own choices according to those values that we instill in them. Also, if you're still interested in the Bible, there's nothing wrong with showing your children the Bible and letting them decide for themselves what it is they want to believe. Interestingly, as a parent, we are our children's highest moral authority. So we really have to ask ourselves as parents, what standard, what example are we going to set for our kids? So instilling morality looks different for everyone. We think of religion as a social formation. For example, when we say it is written, that means a community has agreed to certain behaviors based on law that is written. And if you disagree with those laws and you don't want your kids to abide by those laws, you don't make them laws in your household. In religion, when one is learning these social rules, scripture is used to demonstrate the sanctioned behavior. So likewise, in our home, we have the rules of the house written. We don't punch, hit, kick. We don't yell. We respect each other. We love freely. We knock on each other's doors before entering their rooms, things like that. And how often are we confusing Christian with trustworthy and Christian with moral and Christian with good person? And the goal for us was to have our children follow a moral code that didn't come from obligation. No, a moral code that came from making change in the world and making the world a better place. We all know that this religion sets people up for failure because you basically could do nothing right. And that goes for parents as well. We have such deep impact and influence over our children that it really can go either way. In my house, we teach our children to love who they want and believe what they want. But what sets the standard for how we raise those children is extremely important. So unraveling indoctrination as a parent when you've had a whole lifetime in religion can be extremely trying when you have children. Because what do you do, right? How do you unravel indoctrination in yourself and your children at the exact same time? Well, if we could think back to when we started new eating habits in our family, or new methods of cooking, or if we're moving into a new home, there are plenty of situations in which we experience new things as a family together, and we just framed it in hope and positivity. One of the hardest topics for me was addressing that we will be shunned by people. And that was really hard for my children to accept. But one of the things that has worked for me, and this may work for you, again, I'm just sharing my experience here, is that knowing full well that people were going to shun us and cut us out of their lives, I did not want my children to experience that pain, as little as they are. So I simply set up my kids to expect it. All I said to my kids was, listen, there's going to be people who don't agree with our decision, but that's their choice. That's a them problem. That is up to them. And if people don't want to be friends with you, and this is a lifelong lesson that I'm teaching my children, and if people don't want to be friends with you because you believe differently than they do, or you've changed your mind, then they were not meant to be in your life to begin with. And again, when we frame things in empowerment and hope and positivity, kids can subscribe to that. Putting the power in their hands to make their own choices and to know that they are not the problem is extremely important when it comes to navigating through indoctrination. The other tip I strongly recommend is getting into counseling. There are therapists who specialize in the deconstruction process. And again, I'm just sharing information that I got from my therapist, who happens to be an ExJw and a psychologist. He actually is coming on the show in a couple weeks. Cannot wait. So if you have questions for a family psychologist who specializes in leaving high control religion, you can drop them in the comments and we'll feature them on that episode. And gradually, I see my kids making awesome choices. I focus on the positive. I see my daughter picking and choosing friends. I see her navigating her way through the tween years, and she doesn't have any set, hard and fast rules of us versus them mentality. And interestingly, she is making the most wonderful choices, and I focus on the positive. I notice things, and when I notice things like that, she feels empowered. I remember growing up and how many times my mother would say to me, you can't hang out with that person because they're not a witness. And I had no idea what that meant. I had no idea what that meant for me or why that made this person a bad person. Meanwhile, this girl was the one who was valedictorian of the class, and she was the one who was donating her time on the weekends and volunteering in the neighborhood and cleaning up the playgrounds. These were the kinds of people I wasn't allowed to hang out with simply because they weren't of the same religion. And I don't want my children to focus on the us versus them mentality. I want them to learn to be that person who promotes love and peace and harmony as best as they can, to reverse that cycle of us versus them mentality. The other thing we do is we make it a point to expose them to things that they're going to be exposed to in school. For example, if there's alcohol in our home, my children are exposed to it and they're little. Therefore, there's no mystery there. They're not going to think it's a taboo subject, so they're not going to get curious. Same thing goes for all of these topics that just JW parents tend to not expose their children to. And I'm grateful to my husband because he was against this whole homeschool to keep them out of the world situation. I'm not against homeschooling at all. I know a lot of friends who do it successfully for their own reasons. I'm specifically referring to the people who homeschool so as to keep them out of the world. And the bottom line is that every single day is a learning experience for me as a mom. There are some days where I panic. Don't be fooled. I'm not this empowered person. I don't have all the answers, but I know that with every day that passes, I am growing and I am gaining such an awesome, wholesome relationship with my kids. My daughter is going to be a teenager very soon, and she feels so open that she can talk with me about boys and about things going on in her life. And she knows I am never going to judge her. She knows I am not going to come at her with, well, what do you think of this? She knows I'm not going to come at her with guilt, even though that is what we were trained to do. It is really important that we inspire honest and open communication and ask questions. I actually ignite conversations in my household. If something comes up on TV, I'll ask them, do you know what this means? Here's the other conclusion I had to come to, and maybe this will resonate with you. If my children in their future make a decision that I personally don't agree with, it's really none of my business. I want my children to be independent, self-sufficient, happy with their choices, and also understand the consequences of their choices. And knowing full well that no matter what they do, that as their mom, I'm going to love them no matter what. They would never be kicked out of my home. They would never be shunned by their father and me. Those are the important things we have established in our home. And sure, sometimes we can get carried away as parents leaving high control religion. We can maybe get too attached to an outcome. We could think too ahead of the game. What if she ends up pregnant? Or what if he ends up being a father too young? What if they end up, what if? That can happen to any parent. Religion is not going to stop those anxieties from happening in our family. We sat down as a couple and we thought, okay, what kind of human beings do we see our children becoming? What kind of people do we want to hang out with? And how do we do that? Well, we show them what's going on in the world and why they happen. We expose them to different sides of the coin. We expose them to relationships and behaviors that are unhealthy, and we make them pay attention. We teach them self-awareness. For example, I am the adult daughter of a narcissistic mother. Rather than speak badly of my mother, who happens to be their grandmother, I teach my children about behaviors that are unbefitting. I teach my children to respect themselves and pay attention to the way people talk to you, and to know your worth and to know your value, and how you teach people how to treat you. Teach them about narcissistic behaviors without smearing someone else's name. This way, when the opportunity comes for these children to speak to these people who in my head, I know, oh boy, this is a bad person, they will pick up on the behaviors right away without me having to even say anything. So self-awareness and teaching our children to just be aware of themselves and be aware of their surroundings is extremely important. The other issue I want to discuss is happiness. So many people think that in order to be happy, you have to be religious. Happiness is relative. Happiness is actually an extreme. Sure, we love the feeling of being happy, and sometimes we chase that elusive feeling of happiness. But happiness is one extreme, and sadness is the other extreme. We want to come to the middle point between sadness and happiness. So can you be happy without religion? Absolutely. It just depends on what makes us happy. So many people think that we're going to be miserable when we leave the religion. To be honest with you, I've never felt like a more honest, tolerant, loving, happy, compassionate person. And I admit that when I was in the religion, sure, I had happy moments. I'm sure you can even say that. Sure, there are happy times. We want to take good and bad out of our vocabulary and focus on healthy and unhealthy. Teaching our children what is healthy and unhealthy is one of the ways I'm finding is helping us navigate through this. Morality depends on culture, social structure. Morality is relative. So for me to speak on morality would be clearly opinion-based, which, I mean, this whole thing is an opinion piece. When it comes to healthy and unhealthy, for example, if my daughter came to me and she wanted to talk to me about cigarette smoking, to put a label on something as good or bad would not nearly be as effective as healthy and unhealthy. If I label something as bad to her, she may conclude that that makes her a bad person. That's why if my children, when they were littler, if they're acting out, I never say you're being a bad boy or a bad girl. I say your behavior is not acceptable. And so when it comes to morality, when it comes to certain behaviors, we discuss as a family, is this healthy or unhealthy? Over drinking, is this healthy or unhealthy? Things like that seem to be working for us. So removing good versus bad and replacing it with healthy versus unhealthy is another way to unravel indoctrination in a healthy way. If you have any other tips for parents who are unraveling indoctrination, please do so in the comments. Thank you so much for watching the show. If you want to be a guest on my show and be able to come out and tell your story, I would be honored to help you do that. Please email me, wendirenay@gmail.com. Or I posted a link in the description box for you to just simply schedule it. And this is how we're going to do this, everyone. We are going to band together and we are going to make a movement. We're going to do what we can to help people heal. And there is healing in telling our story. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you next time.